really want to thank the organizers, the Center for Animals and Public Policy, for inviting me. I'm honored to be here at Tufts, and also for highlighting the topic of equine behavior, which actually doesn't get highlighted, in my opinion, as much as it should. And today I'll touch on behavior, needs, and mental health in a human-centered world. It'll be brief, of course, but we'll get a sense of horses here throughout the about 45 minutes or so. But before we get started, for those of you who are present here in the room, who of you spend time with horses in your free time? Who spends time with horses in their free time? A good deal of you. Who here, if you're a student, plans on working professionally with horses upon graduation, or in, again, professional settings? All right, we got a few maybes, one maybe up there. Who of you are already working professionally with horses? Okay, we got one person, yes. And finally, who came to this talk just to make sure I get equine behavior right? Anybody? Yeah, we got a couple. And it's really okay. It's important for us to keep ourselves accountable, or to keep, professionals keeping each other accountable here, especially in this area of thinking, in this topic area that hasn't traditionally had its place in formal education or in higher education, again, specifically equine behavior. So it's important that we check in on each other in that way. Thank you, Megan, for introducing myself. Introducing me, as Megan says, I work at University of Denver. I'm the director of equine programs there, and I do a number of things at the Institute for Human-Animal Connection. I primarily work in two broad areas: therapeutic human-horse interactions, as well as with horse welfare and horse behavior, or what we call horses in communities. And when I think about equine behavior, I think about best available scientific information. I think about this information being critically sourced. And I think about it applied within the settings and processes or systems that humans find themselves in. So really a science approach to behavior with a social science thinking around human-horse interactions and structure. And that's where that critically sourced comes in, because you know that we can skew science or research any way we want. We can put out any kinds of statements and justify just about anything when it comes to other animals, because they're not there necessarily to say otherwise. No representation, no access to our human systems. So that's where we need to be quite careful in how we approach thinking about equine behavior. I wondered if you saw this. This is a recent news story from this month, October 2019. Giddy up, Staten Island. Couple gets pet horse after realizing there's no city law against it. Staten Island, New York. No horsing around. Couple keeps pet steed outside New York City home. There's even a Saturday Night Live weekend update mention of said pet horse. So a little bit from one of the news stories, you can find them by Googling. It basically says, kind of funny, journalistic, who says you need a car in the city? This couple rides their horse, and then it says, for the rest of the time, the horse named Morgie is parked in their driveway. Ha ha. Right? It's amazing. Gets my mind off of things. Neighbor weighs in. The horse is 6 feet away from my kitchen window. The flies and mosquitoes are crazy. The horse whinnies all night long. The city has received 3 complaints, but Article 161 of the City Health Code says as long as the horse is used for recreational, non-commercial purposes, it's all okay. It's happening right now. Staten Island and probably other places too. So it's fair to say that we've had this kind of funny relationship with horses. They have this incredible ability to adapt to all the stuff that we do to them in terms of human enjoyment. See some examples here. But that doesn't mean that it's all good. But really how we mostly think of horses, I think, and especially in a non-work domestic setting like this one, is that the idea of, yeah, horses are great, they keep me company, they add something to my life, they're conveniently also outside my house, so, you know, don't have to worry too much. You know, if they whinny all night, maybe I don't hear that, because I might be in there sleeping. So we have this kind of idea of horses as this benevolent friend, but we also have this. So I live in Colorado, where I see a lot of license plates from my neighboring state of Wyoming. And this is the standard license plate in Wyoming. A horse that's basically in terror displayed on the license plate. So, and we have about 7+ million horses in the United States, much fewer than the dogs and cats that many people that are portable and can live inside. But we also have these instances of sanctioned violence that are sometimes quite peculiar. We also have horses in entertainment and sport. So the first two images there that kind of stick together is from a study on equine pain phase. So the horses were subjected to some levels of pain to see the markers on their face. And then the other horse there is from a competition from a few years ago. And this really makes me think of the social license to operate, if you're familiar with that term, the kind of implicit agreement that the public has with an activity that's not necessarily unlawful, but it makes me think of these things. And in the middle of all of that is the horse. We also can maybe forget, too, that horses are in the middle. So we have here a comic called Fed Up Fred. I recommend going to fedupfred.com, contributing to this artist's work. She does a lot of illustrations that I find really helpful when I do presentations, so I try to highlight that. We have two people saying, oh, look, that poor bear is bored, stressed out of his mind. And then the same two people are looking at a horse who is also displaying some sort of displacement behaviors, front leg frustration, that kind of thing, saying, ah, look at him dancing, he's totally feeling the beat. You know? So we also, the horse is kind of in the middle there, an other, but we don't equate them always with wild animals, even though there are horses who are feral and free roaming. But they don't live in our house and whinny in our ear, so we can kind of forget about them from time to time. But we actually know quite a lot about horses. And my question is, are horses more than what we make them out to be? And that's why I titled the talk, you know, Equine Behavior Needs and Mental Health in a Human-Centered World, to really highlight, and this is where the social science frame comes in, to highlight the fact that there's all this information about horses and their behavior, which we'll look at now. But why aren't we always accessing that? That's what I'm interested in. And are we able to allow horses to be more than what we'd like them to be? And as an aside, and I don't have any material on it here, but I work, as I mentioned, in therapeutic human-horse interactions. So I run a postmaster's program for therapists who want to include equine interactions into psychotherapy services. That's, you know, large part of my work. I'm a clinical psychologist. And especially in that realm, there's a lot of making the horse only what we want them to be, this idea of the healer or the therapist or that kind of thing. So keep this in mind now as we're going to look a little closer at equine behavior and their needs. Are horses more than just what we make them out to be? So we'll do a little snapshot here of basic needs in the horse's living environment, because it becomes so important how the living environment for the horse looks. They spend most of their time away from us because we don't live with them, they don't live with us. So that becomes the bulk of their life. That's their life. In addition to how horses think and feel, which we might even highlight more when we start handling them or interacting directly with them. So there's multiple ways to figure out what are these basic needs, these mental health needs, these physical needs of horses. And one way, in addition to many, is to look at how free-roaming horses use their time budgets. You know, you're familiar with this concept, perhaps, a time budget, how somebody spends their time. So we have free-roaming horse populations, so we can look at them. And we can, of course, do things like look at our shared neurobiology with horses. We can create various ethograms and see, you know, what range of behaviors are displayed in various situations. We can look for stereotypic behaviors, which I'll talk about a little bit in a moment. We can look at stress state or, you know, look for certain target behaviors. These are all strategies that come together to determine what these very basic needs of horses are. And we can actually see some of them in these images that I just took these with my phone. These are of a sanctuary Mustang group east of Denver, so in the Front Range of Colorado. They are not on BLM or Bureau of Land Management land. They are on foundation land or nonprofit lands. But they have enough space here that we can see what these horses are kind of up to, and already get some clues about their most basic behaviors and needs. But the most important thing is, of course, to look at how does this actually function in our domestic living setting. So based on observational studies, we can then create a bunch of visuals to help us compare and contrast what goes on in a horse's life depending on where they live, how they live. So this is from Kylie Worthington. I'm going to pick out two of these. On one side, you have some certain behaviors, these were target behaviors, of free-roaming domesticated horses in France, the Camargue horses, gray horses, live there in the north of France. And then on the other side, you have behaviors of horses who are in typical management, or how horses tend to spend their lives the most when humans are involved. Horses kept in stalls most of the time. Horses get meals. Horses not able to touch each other. So when you look at the enormous difference here in how time is spent, this has both mental impact as well as physical and physiological impact on the horses. Because remember, and you might already know this, so if you do, it's a reminder. If you don't, check it out. Stereotypic behaviors in horses are sometimes called vices, stable vices, right? These behaviors can be oral or locomotory. Cribbing, weaving, head shaking, wood chewing are not a vice. They are a sign of coping. And as a person like me who works with neurodiverse people, I see similar oral and locomotory coping, for instance, in a person who has autism. A little bit of jumping and flapping. I'm not going to mess up my microphone here, but like this, or chewing on something that's not food, perhaps, as a signal to the world around us that something is a little too much. It's a little too exciting in the case of perhaps the person with autism, but for the horse, something is not right in their environment. And these coping behaviors, so let's start shifting that language. Stereotypic, okay, cool, coping, are actually 100% created by humans. We don't see stereotypic behaviors in free-roaming horses. That's a clue. Management issues, stress, incorrect feeding practices cause so much stress for the horse that they actually start doing these stereotypic behaviors. So I have a few visuals here on the most basic mental and physical health needs of horses. And I want you again to think about them. How would they look in a domestic environment? How would they look with my horse at my boarding facility or wherever you see your horses or the horses you interact with? Horses need slow, unrestricted movement. Slow movement, not running, but slow movement that mimics kind of, I'm eating some grass here, I might go over there, get some water, shade, or see some other horse that I like. slow, unrestricted movement. And unrestricted movement, that's not the same as walking in a hot walker, being ridden by a human on the trail slowly. It's about agency over your body. It's like, I love my job, and I feel like I'm, working all the time, but in a good way. But it's still different when I'm not working, not answering phone calls or emails, or just managing my own time. So it's the agency over one's body and direction that is a really core need for horses. Not just to stand still or try to turn around in a 20 by 30 run. Another basic need is frequent eating of fiber. And here it's so important to overlay that human, notice your human thinking, and we'll talk about that a little later too. Because, I don't know, some of you are eating, some of you just finished eating. Did you notice that your stomach expanded a little bit? Did you notice that? Our stomach actually expands. Horses' stomachs don't expand. They're meant to have constant passage of fiber that gets fermented in the large intestine. That's how horses do best, because horses do get ulcers. And horses that are in competitive sports where there's a lot of moving around and stress and restricted eating, they tend to have ulcers. And those ulcers feel just like our ulcers do. So frequent eating of fiber is very, very important. If they can't access grazing, we can come up with other ways, like accessing hay, for instance, and eating that hay slowly through soft netting. Horses absolutely need social housing and interaction. They're social mammals, just like us. Just like us, they might be able to go off and do something and then come back to the group. But without social housing, they're missing crucial parts of both physical and mental health. So with humans, when we want to punish them the worst we can in our state systems or federal systems, we put them in isolation. We put a social mammal, humans, in isolation. That's the worst we can do legally, basically. But with horses, who have the same social needs, we sort of do that because that's easy to house them that way, perhaps. But horses have very deep social housing and interaction needs. Another area which I think we can relate to quite well is a comfortable resting place. This is where I see 99% of horse places don't have a sand pit or other comfy resting place. A lot of horses, if there's manure, especially that's dried up, perhaps more out in the west where it's less wet, they tend to just go lay in dried manure because it at least is a little softer. But it's very easy to dump some sand in your horse area because horses can sleep standing up. I think everybody here might know that. Lock your knees, a little shortwave sleep, cool. But horses need to lay down for what? What kind of sleep? Do you know? Yes. Just like you and me, just like cats and dogs, you need to lay down to dream sleep because you're in a very, surface level of sleep and your limbs might move, and that would be catastrophical if you're standing up. So when horses are not comfortable enough to lay down because the space is so small, they're like, oh gosh, I'm going to get stuck again against this wall, I better not lay down. They're going to start getting sleep deprived. This really good study came out this year on sleep deprivation in horses with some of the research, some of the videos that the researchers coded, where you see horses kind of buckle. They're okay, and then they buckle. Because stress can intensify sleep deprivation issues, as I think you know. Horses need shelter from sun, mostly. It's harder to cool down than warm up if you're a horse. And inclement weather, especially when precipitation is coming sideways, etc., etc. But it's important to give a horse a choice in how they engage with this sheltering. Imagine having a jacket strapped onto you at all times, and you start getting sweaty, like if you're outside working, and you're like, I don't want to take off my jacket, it's too much work, I'm just going to keep shoveling here. And then you get hot, and it's very uncomfortable. Same for horses. Some good studies, one from Denmark, taught the horses to signal whether they wanted their blanket on, off, different times of the day. We saw some variation in individual preferences. And there's also a really good student project came out this year and was presented at the fall ISIS Equitation Science Conference at University of Guelph around the temperature of the horse rose with several degrees, almost like having a fever, when you had a hot blanket on and couldn't thermoregulate because it's just strapped to your body and you might not even be able to walk in and out of the shade. And I can't emphasize this enough, again, the need for affiliation and relationship, the need to have close friendships in horses. It kind of sucks if your artificial herd only has horses you don't like. Forced proximity to people you don't care for so much, also very stressful. Like if I rearrange this whole auditorium right now, I'm like, all right, you're going to sit right there, like next to that person. I don't care if there's an open seat, just right there. So horses have these same preferences and the same needs. We call it pair bonding. Horses who like to stand and sleep together, chill together, their kind of energies sort of match. They feel comfortable with each other. That's a really deep, important need that we have too, to have friends. Choice in sensory stimulation kind of goes with also this idea of shelter and being able to choose and being able to roll somewhere, like how my body is scratched. Maybe I choose to allo-groom, go with my pair-bonded buddy, and we can groom each other here on top of our bodies. Or maybe I like to roll in the more stickly parts, and you like to roll where it's like smooth and cool on the ground. So giving choice in sensory stimulation to the horse. Extremely important for mental health and physical health. And some variation in the environment. For instance, if you are working in a corporate setting and in a cubicle, those gray things, you might just be putting some stuff up there. Maybe a picture, maybe a hanging plant, something to break the monotony of that one block of color. Same for horses. Where do they see that block of color? Stall walls. So creating some variation, and you start noticing that these pictures are not showing, free-roaming horses never seen by humans, but instead horses in domestic settings where we've rethought the design of their living environment. And that's a whole nother talk, but that's something I spend my time doing and think about quite a bit, how to improve welfare and meet these basic needs in their living environment, creating a living system, not just a place where they are. And of course, we need to provide horses that we keep in this way with health care, hoof care, dental care, parasite control, treatment of disease. Some of these things we actually cause just by not letting the horse chew enough and chew different things, not letting him move across various surfaces so that they can wear their feet down, or maybe we nail some metal to their foot and they can't do anything about it. So we have responsibility here, healthcare-wise, and those are also basic needs of horses, but they're, as you can see, a little broader than this. Here's just a visual of again, just a few examples, most basic needs. And those of you who said you're spending time with horses, you might start doing a bingo board here and seeing how many of these needs are actually met in the living environment for the horses that you are with. There's various ways then to assess welfare, to think about basic needs and have some sort of system or framework to assess them. And that requires assessment tools that are focused not just on negative or absence of things, but also seeking out or engaging in positive states and behaviors, and that are multidimensional. And one good example of a welfare assessment tool that's emerged, actually it's been around for quite a while, but just emerged more recently in the more public eye, is the 5 domains model. And you can see the reference there from Meller. And here you have 4 domains that they call situation, physical, functional domains, and it all filters through the affective experience or the mental state. How the horse perceives these other areas becomes the totality of their health, their welfare, physical and psychological state of well-being with species-specific consideration, one way to look at it, or attempts or capacity for the animal to cope. Those are, again, some basic welfare definitions. This is from Horses South Australia, this visual here. This is a quote by Lori Marino, and it goes, "Intelligence, that is, cognitive complexity, can be a liability, not a buffer, for attempting to cope with life in an artificial, barren setting." Again, intelligence can be a liability, not a buffer, for attempting to cope with life in an artificial, barren setting. Lori Marino studies large sea mammals, but I thought this quote is quite fitting for thinking about basic needs of horses, their behavior in their living environment. So shifting a little now to how horses think and feel, again, reminding you that this is a snapshot of many things that we could think about when it comes to horses, their cognition and emotions. So in sum, to make this easy, similar emotions, similar perception of pain and stress as humans. This you can also say about dogs and cats, other mammals that are really like us, that we might spend time with. So you want to start there, that their emotions, their feelings, as well as their perception of again, stress and kind of negative states, really start there by, it's actually kind of the same. We can start there, there's nuances to it, but that's a safe assumption to make. And then when we start thinking about how horses think, their cognition or learning processes, also similar, but here's an exception, and here's where it's important to note that there is an exception, or a range of them, but for simplicity's sake. Again, very basic overview from McLean of a human brain, just an outline, and the brain of a horse. And you can see that there's more mass, more folds in the front here, in large prefrontal cortex, especially in the medial part. And that just means a few things. But you see, the rest of the brain sort of is similar. And that's what I want you to think about. Similar emotions, that kind of thing. But then we start looking at this area, and we notice that horses, as a result of this, as a result of not having more folds, more mass, more activity here, because they do not eat other animals, so they need less kind of problem solving around catching or laying in wake and waiting for another animal, because food is everywhere. There's other capacities, capabilities that horses have that are super good for them. And that's how we should think about cognition and emotions. This works for me as a species. Great. So horses do not have complex reasoning abilities or self-insight reflection. And what I mean by that is that your horse is not going, what kind of horse will I become? How will I make a difference as a horse? This ability to cognate, to meta-think, about yourself as your being, Horses are not able to solve problems abstractly. It might look this way because, like us, horses are very good at trial and error learning, Doing something, did that work, didn't it work, depends on what I'm going to do next. And horses are not able to access concepts such as winning makes my owner happy, or even, what's an owner? But if you look deeper into this, winning, first you got to know what winning is. Because again, if food's right there, and water sources are typically large when it comes to free roaming situations, there's not like a need to get somewhere first, necessarily. So you got to have that, winning means getting somewhere first, okay? Or doing, well, it could be more complex. Moving your legs a certain way next to letter X, or something like that. Very complex. So first the horse needs to know that, and then know that the winning actually means something to humans. And the owner is happy because now they feel better as the horse as their proxy. Look, I won this. if horses had this level of reasoning or comprehension, I'm proud to be in a parade, or working with people with disabilities enriches my life as a horse. If they had these capacities, would also probably unionize, ask for more fiber, more resources, improve living environments, positions on IRBs for our researchers here. So you can't have one without another, and that comes back to our horses more than we just make them. So just be sure to think those things through, even though it seems that way, and I will look at why it seems that way in a moment. There are benefits. This is not like, oh, this is boo-hoo for horses. No, there are benefits to not having this area, which a lot of my therapy clients are like, oh, I kind of wish I had a horse's brain, because you have excellent memory, because you don't keep recalling your memories over and over and over, and you're not necessarily engaging in stressful mental time travel, which I might ask you to do now, like, what about tomorrow? Oh, lots of stuff happening tomorrow. It's a Tuesday. What happens on Tuesdays? I don't know, but whatever you all do on Tuesdays. Or think about last year and how things went then, or worry about, down payments, or I can feel like the crunching of stomachs in the room as I'm mentioning these random things. But outside of sensory triggers, so being connected through a memory visually, scent-wise, touch-wise, that kind of thing, horses don't do this, but they do it when it comes to these sensory triggers. So I can't tell my horse, think about Tuesday or whatever, but if that horse catches a whiff of a certain perfume that somebody wore where things didn't go well, or a certain visual kind of outline, 100% that horse has a traumatic memory, an unintegrated memory. 100% horses have signs of depression. I mean, we medicate dogs with human anti-anxiety meds. Like, this is comparative medicine. This is a thing. This is 100% a thing. So traumatic stress, anxiety, depression, all of these things can exist outside of this prefrontal medial area. And just, again, as a quick visual, here's a hierarchy of learning abilities from McGreevy, and we share, us and horses, these first ones inside the yellow box, which are our most fundamental ways of orienting and learning in the world. Us and horses, we do all these things. And then there's some abstract and concept learning that we have, like conjunctive and disjunctive relationships-ish. If A is B and B is C, then what is A and D and X, and that kind of stuff. But we share these learning processes with horses, and we engage mostly in these, really, fundamentally. So misunderstanding how horses learn, think, and feel actually come with serious consequences for horses. Here's another one of these Fed Up Fred comics, where Lisa is the person and Fred's the horse. Lisa says, the more I move Fred's feet, the more respect I get. A human concept. Fred here is anthropomorphically speaking in human words and says, she must really hate me. Lisa says, yes, he has accepted me as his leader. And Fred says, so glad I figured out how to stop her from chasing me. So here we have a human who's misunderstood concepts related to social order in horses. And imagine them being contrived and strange, such as we perhaps create in human settings, especially very hierarchical settings like universities or hospitals or the military, etc. Misunderstandings comes with serious consequences. Here's Lisa and Fred again. Lisa doesn't want to dismount because she thinks Fred will win his little game. Human thinking, Fred's playing a game with me. Human game. Yeah, abstract. Fred didn't want to play this game anyway. His idea of fun doesn't involve back injuries. And here's where we have to let science lead, carefully sourced science. Because 90% of back issues under saddle, bucking under saddle, comes from back issues, not playing games that humans know you're playing a game with them, ish. Here's Lisa again. Don't worry, Once I'm on, he's fine. Okay, who's seen this? Who knows this? Yep, absolutely. Yep, hands everywhere. Fred says, fine, can somebody please translate? Because my message doesn't seem to be getting through. Other horses say no in a lot less polite way. Horses are not giving you a hard time. This is what we tell our therapists in training too. Also, they're having a hard time. Somebody's not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. You're kind of collateral in that hard timeness, right? And then finally, which touches on my clinical human areas of trauma, post-traumatic stress, dissociative processes, defense cascade, those are the things I work with human clients, and addiction too. Here we have Fred standing, not looking too great. There's a lot of things going on. And one person says, wow, so your horse is so bomb-proof. Who's heard the word bomb-proof with horses? Yes, lots of nodding and hands. Unlike my scaredy cat who likes to take the piss, which is a British saying of messing around or that kind of thing. He really is worth his weight in gold. And then Fred's friend here, this is the key. Fred's friend, the other horse, says, go to your happy place, Fred. And it's a little funny, but it's a lot more sad. Because horses do engage in the defense cascade, and horses do dissociate, where the parasympathetic system takes over, there's a lower of breathing, respiration rate, heart rate, and the horse just kind of looks a little bomb-proof, huh? But this is a way to cope with extreme stress. And cumulative experiences can lead to what you see on the top there, learned helplessness. The giving up on improving your own health and well-being is what learned helplessness is. We can experience this during a major depressive disorder, for instance. Major depressive episode during having depression. We just give up. And this 100% happens to cats and dogs and horses too, when the human conditions and the stress from the environment set them up that way. All right, final stretch. So what is the opposite then of putting into practice? Because that's what we want to be thinking about. Misuse, ignore, forget, neglect, not use, abstain. This is an auto-generated picture of these from the thesaurus, but I love it. So I put in, what's the opposite of putting into practice? But these words are key here. Now you know maybe some things you maybe didn't even know before. Because the problem with common sense here, thinking, well, I don't need to formally learn about this, I have common sense. Whose common sense? Clue, human common sense. And that goes wrong. Both those people there are convinced that the other horse is the poor horse. And humans can justify anything. We're meaning-making machines. Like, it's not about justification. Because you can make that loop. It's like when you argue both sides of a debate in high school. Like, you know how to do that. It's not about your justifications. It's about going beyond that. Same here, speaking of blanketing. What happened to you, says one horse. The other says, my mom is cold. Especially now that cold weather is coming in. Think about, do you know the horse's thermoneutral zone? Do you know your individual horse's preferences? Or are you just like, it's pretty cold, and to dampen my conscience, even though I can sort of forget about the horse because they're not right here, shaking. Just to dampen my consciousness, I'm just going to, or my conscience, I'm just going to slap on a few blankets. But remember that thing, body temperature rising with like 3 degrees. It's really long-term health issues there. And again, common sense, we can't rely on it for our sport and entertainment either. Coming back to social license to operate, there's some things happening in the horse world where I feel it's a little questionable, around that. Different disciplines, different things happening. So learning about the behavior of another species, now we're talking about horse behavior, or even the behavior of, another human, requires us to learn a few things about ourselves that can get in the way. Because again, we have all this information, great research even about performance and rideability and learnability, which are terms that are used in sport horse or performance horses to, be the best. The best horses have great rideability. They can learn quickly. They're not too anxious, but a little bit anxious, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things improve when horses are, for instance, in a pasture, grazing. Clear research. So what are these human species tendencies that keep us from accessing this information? You've heard this before, right? Anthropomorphism. Who's heard that term? Anthropomorphism. Yes. Awesome. Anthro, human, morph means to morph. So morphing somebody or something else into human. Tendency to attribute traits, characteristics, thinking, intentions to non-human animals. Here's an avocado talking to what I think is a mango, maybe a peach. New plan. Pretend to be ripe. When you still taste like cardboard, it'll drive them crazy. And then mango/peach answers, psychological warfare. I'm in. And the problem is we tend to do this weird projection of the worst possible traits we think humans might have onto other animals. Or, as I found out working in a residential setting with folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, onto nonverbal people. Just making stuff up what they might think. Oh, I have to show her. She's not the boss of me. I'm the boss here. Nonverbal client doesn't want to leave the TV because there's cats on the TV. I don't want to get up either. So, again, weird tendencies we have. But it's not all bad. It's not all bad. Anthropomorphism actually helps us connect to horses and other animals. So what's the good part? You know this already. Yes, we went over this already. We have very similar emotions, perception of pain, stress. We have the same neurochemicals. You recognize those. We're both social mammals. We can start there when it comes to the feeling and being and stress and welfare. We can start there. I'm going to start by assuming we're really alike here and then start making decisions off of that. But we often misunderstood cognitive processes, like willing to please. Maybe heard that. Seems innocuous, like willing to please. What could go wrong? Well, they could also be, dark side, unwilling to please. And then we go about punishing the horse for what we incorrectly think is there. Like we've gone on this abstract branch that doesn't even exist. And now we're over there, like whipping the horse. That happens a lot. Or we can do a little blame shifting. That works when you're the one with power in the system. You can blame shift. Push that blame over. Label horses for what issues humans have caused. That's a hard-mouthed horse. Not like, that horse has really shitty human trainers. Boo. No, it's the horse that was hard-mouthed and dull and lazy and spoiled and bad. Blame shifting, power move. Watch out for it. It's not a really healthy way to go about things. And the other term, anthropocentrism. Who's heard of anthropocentrism? Okay, about a few fewer. Okay, anthropocentrism. The idea that humans are the most valuable entities in the universe, that our values, our experiences supersede those of other living beings. If this is entertaining and fun to me, it must be okay. Like horses in circuses. I don't know if that's controversial to say here, but, things like that. If I'm loving it, it must be good and morally right. Because how could it be wrong if it just serves me, the human? So there's just a visual of different ways of thinking about how do we actually relate to ourselves when it comes to other species. So it's about being aware of these tendencies so we don't fall into a mental trap of missing information about equine behavior, for instance. And I won't go through these because I want to have a little time for questions, but there's other things we do. This is also part of social science, also some psychology. There's tendencies we have, making meaning, our social needs with other humans, especially our need for self-protection, and threat, psychological threats, and our power and privilege systems that we've set up, where we can decide everything, and we can turn everything to our advantage because we hold the power as a human species member over other animals. So as we are concluding here, I wanted to give you this quote by Bell Hooks, which is, "The heart of justice is truth-telling, seeing ourselves and the world the way it is rather than the way we want it to be." And everybody, of course, has to interpret what that truth is. But you see the meaning here is, again, about daring to see things that are also uncomfortable and reflect poorly on us, even though we have the power, even though we can choose to not feel that way, because we can just make the horse into something that they're not. This is an actual horse. His name is Shiloh, and he has one life. That's Shiloh. So learning about behavior of horses is not just some abstract intellectual pursuit. It has actual and real consequences for others who might not be that different from you, except for that pesky mental time travel, think about tomorrow, stress about it. Yeah. And I also wanted you to think about, especially you all who are veterinarians or veterinarians in training, what if your lawmaker, for the policy students here, what if your lawmaker or healthcare provider was another species? Like how would that work? And just making a few of these mental kind of switches to counteract these tendencies to say, no, it can't be that. My horse loves their 50 blankets. She doesn't know. She doesn't know what she's talking about. So with that, I wanted to leave a few moments for questions. This is my email. I would love to hear from you. I love talking about these things, and also really appreciate my colleagues here at the center and at Tufts. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you. All right. Do you need the cube? Oh, it is working. Okay. And I also, as you're gearing up, I also left a few resources here about the work we do at the Institute for Human-Animal Connection, and a course on equine behavior that is university level. Anybody can access it. Okay. All right. Questions?
Hello.
Hello.
So my name is Ariel. My question is, sorry.
I think that was...
You talk a lot about your work, like helping people make their horses' lives better in their living environment, and people sometimes when they're confronted with things that are different from what they're doing, it makes them uncomfortable. It makes them non-compliant sometimes. And I know that in the animal world in general, there are often a lot of differing opinions on the right way to do something. So how do you approach those situations if you ever get pushback?
Yeah, well, first of all, there is a righter way to do things. Okay, so we hear a lot about this, but everybody has these different ways of leading horses, and and it's like, no, there's actually there's a righter way to lead horses, and that's the perspective that takes the horses, thinking, feeling into consideration. But what you're talking about is humans. Yes, I love humans. Like, I love humans, I love other mammals, I mostly work with mammals, and our process of what's basically called cognitive dissonance. Being able to know that you're doing one thing that now you're maybe confronted with is not great, and that's uncomfortable mentally. Same discomfort and pain receptors as physical pain. It's not I'm not minimizing this. I'm actually maximizing this idea of this discomfort. So how do we help people hold these two concepts parallel? I want to change what I'm doing because I'm not doing something that I want to keep doing. But here I am yet doing it because it's hard to change. We want to help people, A, be able to hold these things parallel so you don't throw one away saying, actually wasn't right to begin with, or now I don't even want to see a horse because I've been so bad and I feel so depressed now, and, you know, like, go to those extremes. So the same things as with anything. Same thing as with you having to get up and go to work at night. You don't one day just set your alarm for 3 a.m. and just like injure yourself in the process when you're half asleep. You incrementally set that alarm and get used to it, and all of a sudden it feels like, hey, this is cool. I feel like I can get up at this time now. So you help people make small incremental changes. If that's what you're doing, if you're doing that through relationship, as opposed to another kind of activism where you're just exposing, you know, something and you're doing it in a different way. But if you have a relationship, if I have a relationship with somebody, I help them make changes that they feel capable of making and feel good about, and I try to mitigate harm. If I'm asked for my input, it's probably some change might come. So I'm very careful about not offering unsolicited feedback. But instead, I might model. I might be going about my business over here with my horse and showing that something else is possible. So being very attuned to emotional threat and emotional capabilities of people is key, even when we're also wanting to protect vulnerable populations like horses. But it doesn't work to do it in other ways.
Great, thank you. I know we have to make room for the next class, so if you have any other questions, you can email Nina or send them to Jenny. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, folks, and I will be slowly walking that way if you want to catch me, or come grab one of our resources. Would love to say hi to you all.